Trade wars are no longer just about tariffs, speeches, or political theater. Behind closed doors, Canada and several European powers are now examining America's biggest economic weak spots, and some of those vulnerabilities could directly impact U.S. farming, manufacturing, financial markets, and even future technology growth. From fertilizer supply chains to billions in foreign investment exposure, Washington may be discovering that economic leverage works both ways. Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. In today's video, we're diving into the growing pressure points quietly reshaping the balance of power between America and some of its closest allies around the world today. Fertilizer crisis. Canada holds America's food supply. One of America's most overlooked economic vulnerabilities sits deep beneath Saskatchewan's farmland. Potash may not sound as dramatic as oil or semiconductors, but it is one of the key ingredients used in modern fertilizer production. Without stable access to it, American agriculture would face enormous pressure. The United States imports over 90% of its potash supply, with Canada alone providing roughly 80% of total demand. That means U.S. crop production heavily depends on Canadian mining output. Germany and Canada are now reportedly evaluating how strategic resources like potash could become leverage during trade disputes with Washington. Germany's K+S operates the massive Bethune mine in Saskatchewan, while BHP's upcoming Jansen project could strengthen Canada's dominance even further. Analysts warn tariffs would mostly hurt American farmers through higher fertilizer, crop, and food costs. And once you realize how deeply fertilizer supports the entire food economy, the next vulnerability becomes even more significant, because it involves the financial system itself. But agriculture is only one layer of America's exposure. Canada's financial footprint inside the U.S. economy may be even more powerful over the long term. $733 billion Shockwave. Canada quietly pulls financial power. While potash highlights America's agricultural exposure, another number is gaining attention across global financial markets. $733 billion. That is the estimated value of Canadian investments currently tied to the United States economy. Canadian pension giants including CPP Investments, OMERS, CDPQ, PSP Investments, and Ontario Teachers' Pension Plan hold massive stakes in American infrastructure, technology, logistics, real estate, and private equity. For decades, this steady capital flow benefited the U.S. economy quietly in the background. But Canada is increasingly encouraging institutional money to stay home instead. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government is promoting domestic investment into LNG exports, EV battery minerals, AI infrastructure, Arctic shipping corridors, and defense manufacturing. Analysts believe even a partial redirection of Canadian pension assets could gradually weaken investment momentum in certain American sectors over the next decade significantly. And as Canada strengthens domestic investment priorities, Europe is simultaneously examining entirely different American vulnerabilities tied to healthcare, semiconductors, and industrial technology. And this is where the story starts becoming far bigger than Canada alone, because Europe may already be mapping America's most sensitive industrial dependencies. Supply chain exposure. Europe maps America's weakest links. As tensions between Washington and several allies continue rising, European leaders are reportedly mapping America's biggest industrial and technological dependencies. What they found surprised many analysts. European firms supply critical ingredients used in nearly half of America's major branded medicines, while Europe also dominates important insulin supply chains relied on by millions of Americans daily. The semiconductor sector reveals another major vulnerability. Although the United States leads in AI software and chip design, advanced semiconductor manufacturing still depends heavily on European technology. Dutch giant ASML, alongside German firms Zeiss and Trumpf, produces the lithography systems required to manufacture cutting-edge processors. Meanwhile, American AI expansion increasingly relies on European industrial companies like Siemens. Combined with Europe's enormous consumer market, Brussels now holds far more leverage over Washington than many policymakers previously assumed. And once you connect pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, AI infrastructure, and industrial equipment together, the financial implications become impossible to ignore. Before we reveal the final and potentially biggest leverage point of all, take a quick second to like the video and subscribe to Piston Pundit so you never miss our future automotive and geopolitical deep dives. Because the next chapter may explain why global financial markets themselves are becoming part of this growing economic realignment. Financial pressure point. Allies target America's economic lifeline. The final piece of this story involves global finance, and it may be the most powerful leverage point of all. European investors collectively hold more than $10 trillion in American assets, including stocks, corporate debt, government securities, and infrastructure investments. For decades, the United States benefited from being viewed as the world's safest destination for international capital. European banks, pension funds, and institutional investors poured enormous amounts of money into American markets because of long-term stability and strong returns. But geopolitical tensions are beginning to change that conversation. European and Canadian policymakers are increasingly discussing economic diversification, alternative partnerships, and reduced dependency on Washington. Even gradual reductions in foreign investment exposure could eventually weaken capital inflows and raise borrowing costs inside the United States. At the same time, allied nations are rapidly expanding cooperation in energy, AI infrastructure, defense manufacturing, and critical minerals. And that growing coordination may ultimately reshape the balance of economic influence across the Western alliance itself. Which brings us to the biggest question of this entire story. Is Washington watching the early stages of a historic Allied realignment? Verdict: the Allied economic shift changing global power. The biggest takeaway from this entire situation is not that Canada or Europe have openly threatened the United States. It is that America's closest allies are now carefully identifying areas where Washington depends heavily on them, from fertilizer and pharmaceuticals to semiconductors and financial capital. That alone marks a major geopolitical shift. For decades, America operated from a position where allies depended primarily on U.S. technology, markets, military protection, and financial power. But Canada and Europe now appear increasingly focused on domestic investment, industrial self-reliance, and diversified partnerships. If these trends continue accelerating, the long-term consequences could reshape agriculture, manufacturing, technology, and investment flows across the Western world. The real question now is whether Washington can rebuild strategic trust before today's economic vulnerabilities evolve into much deeper and more permanent fractures within allied relationships globally. So what do you think about Canada and Europe quietly identifying America's biggest vulnerabilities? Could fertilizer, semiconductors, and foreign investment eventually become major geopolitical leverage tools? And do you believe Washington can repair these relationships before economic fragmentation accelerates even further? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to Piston Pundit and turn on notifications so you never miss our next vehicle updates, industry analysis, and geopolitical automotive stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's plenty more to explore.